Welcome to the Jaco Report. I'm Charles Jaco. Back in March of 2017, St. Louis Treasurer Tishaura Jones came within 888 votes of being elected mayor of St. Louis. As dissatisfaction with Mayor Lyda Krewson has grown, Post-Dispatch columnist Bill McClellan has dubbed Jones the, quote, shadow mayor of St. Louis. Jones, for her part, has been tending to her duties as treasurer and criticizing Krewson on a variety of issues. And Jones recently tweeted, quote, 2021 is right around the corner. Now, oddly enough, that's the year of the next mayor's election, making it seem like Jones will run for mayor again. Joining us now to talk about that and a lot more is St. Louis City Treasurer Tishaura Jones. Thank you very much for coming in. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Well, after that introduction, I got to ask you, are you going to run for mayor again in 2021?
Well, right now I'm focused on my re-election as treasurer, which comes up in August of next year. So we'll see what the tea leaves tell us after that.
Although you were thinking about it when you made that tweet, 2021 is around the corner. Now, was that less setting yourself up to run and more just expressing dissatisfaction with the Krewson administration?
I think we're expressing the fact that 2021 is close. Closer than we think.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
You have been criticizing Mayor Krewson on quite a few things. One quote you had was you criticized what you called the Krewson-Rex-Singfield justice system. Specifically, what did you mean by that?
Well, Rex Singfield volunteered $25,000 reward for the information leading to the killers of children who've been losing their lives in our streets in St. Louis. And it had a time limit on it. And anyone who does any research knows that increased rewards don't work. The research I've done is less than 2% of people actually claim those rewards. And then, you know, so that said to me is that so our children are only worth $25,000 in a week. Our children are worth more than that. And we have to stop funding this arrest and incarcerate model of criminal justice in our city. It's not going to work. We have to do something bigger and better and bolder.
Okay, when you say bigger and better and bolder, what specifically are you thinking about?
I'm thinking a comprehensive approach to public safety in the city, reimagining public safety, closing the workhouse and using that money to invest in communities. I was at a forum and a doctor from BJC said that a $10,000 investment yields a whole host of returns in areas that haven't seen any investment. Anybody who drives north of Del Mar can show you that north of Del Mar, areas or neighborhoods north of Del Mar haven't been invested in years.
And that links to reducing crime how?
There's a direct link between poverty and crime, absolutely.
When it's interesting, we're just coming off the so-called crime summit with the governor and the mayor. And
the county executive.
And the county executive. Yeah. And we had Police Chief Hayden on this program a couple of weeks ago. And I asked him what came out of that. And he said it is 100% enforcement. It's all about boots on the ground. That's what they talked about. They didn't talk about intervention strategies. They didn't talk about any long-term stuff. This is just flooding the zone with more cops, putting state patrolmen on the interstates to free up a few dozen city police officers to go in and enforce in some of these neighborhoods. What do you think about the idea that the focus on this with the interplay between the city and the state and the county is 100% on the boots on the ground enforcement end, saying, you know, we need to roust more people, arrest more people, put more people in jail, put the fear of God in more people, and that will stop this?
Right, that's not going to work. Any city around this country that has seen a marked decrease in crime has also increased investment in their people. They've invested in putting social workers in the police department. They've invested in expanding mental health resources. They've invested in our children in our schools. And this won't work. We have to meet the problem at its face, and there are tons of organizations that are already doing this. You have to go into these communities and talk to people and see what they need. Sankofa St. Louis, for example, has been doing that, taking gang members directly off of the streets and getting them what they need. We have to look at job placement. Anybody that's picking up a paycheck is not picking up a gun. And really, when we look at all of the statistics, only 20% of the people are creating 80% of the crime. So let's look at that 20% and see what they need. But none of those solutions have ever been brought up, except for, recently. Now all of a sudden everybody's on the cure violence bandwagon.
What do you think of the Cure Violence program, which seems to a lot of people to be along much the same model that Better Family Life has been doing, getting so-called interveners to go in and try to diffuse situations before they develop? I detect a little skepticism on your part about that.
Well, it used to be called focused deterrence, and they have seen a lot of good data and outcomes in other cities where they've employed this model. So I applaud the comptroller putting in $1.5 million to expand it, because it doesn't need to be just one or two neighborhoods, because crime doesn't happen in just one or two neighborhoods in St. Louis. So I applaud the comptroller putting more money towards it, and let's see if it works. But we haven't tried this strategy anywhere where the city has come up and stepped up to the plate and said, we want to fund this. And I've seen in other cities where a model similar to Cure Violence, which is literally taking gang members and drug dealers off the street and getting them employed with living wages so they can support their families, and making sure that that they have the social supports to not turn back to that life. That's the only way we're going to, well, that's one of the many ways that we're going to solve this.
Now, when I had, again, Chief Hayden on this program, and we had the mayor on this program the following week, they both indicated that one of the strategies, pardon me, in fact, the primary strategy they were going to use is to try to bust up street corner drug dealing. Chief Hayden said when you get drug dealing, you're more likely to have guns, shots fired around promiscuously, and somebody's going to get hurt. So rousting street corner drug dealers apparently is one of the top priorities of this anti-crime surge that came out of the crime summit. What do you find wrong with that strategy?
Well, what are you going to do with the people who are already addicted to drugs? Then what are they going to do? Will they turn to a life of crime in order to get what they need? What substance abuse programs are you offering to help those who are currently addicted to drugs? Because right now, the only substance abuse programs that are out there are in our jails or in the workhouse.
There's been a lot of focus on underlying causes when it comes to the epidemic of violence in St. Louis, and especially the murders of these children. But at some point, don't you have to point the finger at individuals in the community and say it's a matter of personal responsibility? If you know who pulled the trigger and killed a kid and you're not coming forward, you're just as guilty as the person who pulled the trigger?
I would not say that. I mean, there's a relationship between the community and the police where the community do not trust police, or they don't trust anyone to tell what's going on, and it's unfortunate. And until that relationship changes between the community and the police, we will still see this cone of silence in our neighborhoods.
Now, you anticipated the question I was going to ask, which is the relationship between the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department and the African American community. A lot of this has been exacerbated by people like Jeff Ruda, the business manager for the police union, who makes all kinds of inflammatory statements. You get the Jason Stockley case, you get other cases like it, you get the case of the black undercover detective who was beaten up during the Stockley protests.
The Plainview Project.
Right,
yes.
The Plainview Project, which we revealed the specifics of on this program. So tell me, if you were in a position to do something about that, i.e. mayor controlling the police department, how would you deal with that sort of thing? Because, again, when we had Mayor Cruson on this program, she said she believed it was, quote, a few bad apples, close quote, that there was no systemic racism or problem within the police department, and that by weeding out a few individuals, you could solve the problem. Now, if that doesn't work, as mayor, what would you do to try to fix this problem that's obviously there? What would be within the mayor's power to do to move things around in the police department or change things so that the relationship between the community and the cops is better? What can be done?
So I have a friend who is the deputy chief of the Columbia Police Department, and I was talking with him one day, and he said, in order to police the community, you have to love the community. And also, it's about culture. We also see that there are tons of openings in the police department, and that's city and county. This isn't a job that everybody wants to have. Now, let me also back up and say that I know that first responders and police have a hard job, and they're going through a lot, and they get called for everything. When you dial 911, it's for help. And that kind of help comes from police. But what if we could put different types of professionals within the police department? Social workers, psychiatrists, substance abuse counselors. And that way, when that call comes in for 911, that call gets triaged and the appropriate personnel gets dispatched to that particular incident. I was talking with a captain in SLPS who said that there was a pilot project that they did in conjunction with BJC Behavioral Health, where they put social workers in the police department in one of the districts. And out of 859 calls, 49% could have been answered by a social worker. So what does that tell you? That tells you that people are calling for help, and it doesn't necessarily always deal with, or half the time, it doesn't deal with police. So if we are reimagining public safety, and public safety is much more than just safety on our streets, it's safety in our homes. So if we can reimagine that and put out the right personnel to respond to different incidents, then I think we'll see a change.
Do you think bringing down a harder hammer on police officers who are suspected of racist behavior would help? Because so far, and I point this out because with the Plainview Project,
right,
there have been 13 officers in Philadelphia who've been terminated because of this. Here, of the several dozen, I believe 22. Current officers, only 5 have been looked at for discipline according to the union and put on desk duty. Everybody else is still working as before, and those cases have not been even adjudicated. Now, in the minds of some, that would send the message that, okay, this is strictly minor. You posted Confederate flag memes and a bunch of other stuff insulting the black community, but that's not really important. We'll wait until this blows over. Would you be more aggressive in punishing, as mayor, would you be more aggressive in punishing these sorts of officers?
Not punishing those officers and not having a no tolerance policy for people who don't respect the people that they are sworn to serve and protect, I think is a violation of all of our public duty. And we have 22 officers who we don't know what happened with those cases, and that sends a message to the community that we're going to protect these officers over your lives, and that's not right.
Do you think lifting the residency requirement is what's necessary? Because both the chief and the mayor seem to think that if you lift the residency requirement, you will get the 120 to 140 officers they're short like that pretty quickly.
Well, there's no residency requirement in the county, and the county is down officers as well. So that residency requirement thing is a farce. Instead of trying to tell people where to live, how about we convince them that the city is a place where they want to live instead?
But you said and I believe the quote was, if you've got to patrol the community, you have to love the community. I mean, you can't legislate somebody loving somebody else.
No, and if they don't, they gotta go. Then this isn't the job for them. I mean, there are places where they can go. We have 58 different police departments within the St. Louis metropolitan region. But I think the leadership needs to come from, the chief is a good friend and he's doing what he can, but the leadership needs to come from up top.
Now, speaking of leadership, there's been a lot of criticism overall that as the violent crime rate has gone up, and you've had all these kids under age 16 murdered this summer, that there's been a seeming, at least the appearances, of a leadership vacuum in City Hall. Specifically, the Mayor Cruson, in the minds of a lot of her critics, just doesn't seem to know how to deal with this, and there has not been forceful leadership. Look, you're a city official, you're a black person, you've lived in St. Louis most of your life. I mean, what's your read? What do you think?
Well, the other thing you left out is I'm a mom. of a 12-year-old boy who could have easily been one of those victims, because there aren't too many nights where we don't go to sleep with the lullaby of gunshots in the distance. There have been times when he's been playing outside and people have been driving up the street shooting guns in the air. One of those bullets could have come down and hit him. Also, one day when he was walking from my house to my father's house, which is a block away, a short block away, a young man decided that he wanted to try to mug my son and pulled a gun on him. So that's why it's so personal to me, because it could have easily been him. And this is a crisis. This is a crisis, and people need to know that you care. You know, they may not remember what you did, but they remember that you showed up.
Do you get the impression that Mayor Cruzen does not care?
I don't get the impression that she doesn't care, but I just think I get the impression that she's over her head.
In specifically regarding what?
Regarding how the best response to our crime issue right now. And it's not this continuing to fund this arrest and incarcerate model. It's getting in the community. It's pulling people together. We have 9 citywide elected officials, 28 aldermen, and we should all be at the table coming up with solutions and offering resources to help our city. But instead, she stays locked in room 220, or 200 rather, I'm in 220. She stays locked in room 200, and we don't hear anything from her.
Do you think this is a function of her capabilities specifically, or do you think this is a longer-term function of the white versus black Democratic Party you've always had in this city, where to a lot of white politicos, the northern city limits are Delmar Boulevard? I mean,
right.
Do you think she's sort of a creature of all of this, or is there anything specific about Mayor Cruzen that falls short?
Yeah, I don't know, because, Mayor Slay and I all never agreed on everything. But the one thing he was available. When I had ideas and I brought them to him, he would, take the time to meet with me, take the time to listen, and help if he could. And then, so we had a great working relationship. Look, I don't have to like you to work with you. And so it does, or even love you for that matter. But if we can work together on one thing, if we're all focused on one agenda, which is helping our city, get out of this rut of violent crime, then we can leave all those egos at the door. I was in the legislature for 4 years and worked with Republicans who I knew, were pro-life and came from areas of Missouri where, they had never seen a black person or didn't like black people at all. But that didn't stop us from working together to find out things that we agreed on and work together towards those. Everything else, we can leave outside the door.
Okay, well, contrast the relationship you had with Francis Slay with the relationship you have with Mayor Cruzen.
I don't have a relationship with Mayor Cruzen.
None at all?
Not at all.
I mean, have you asked for meetings that she hasn't scheduled? Has she approached you? I mean,
I've had one meeting with Mayor Cruzen, and that was about draining the reserves of the Treasurer's office.
No meetings on anything else? Have you requested them?
I have not. I don't need to. I do, but I'm focused on the Treasurer's office. Or I'm sorry, she's on the Funds Committee, so I've had 3 meetings with Mayor Cruzen.
Real quickly, airport privatization. It looks like that is, the study is at least going to go forward. We have heard from some people who are very, very close to this that the books are essentially being cooked and that there's no way you would get a ton of money up front for Lambert, given the passenger load there. And since you would have to pay off over $400 million in airport debt, before anything happened, that if you privatize the airport, there would be almost nothing left for the city. Others have said, it's worth exploring at least. What do you think?
I don't think so. The airport is doing well. It's, it's coming back. Our passenger loads are up. Their investments, which I manage, are making money. We've made over $25 million in investments from this for the city overall. And some of the investment strategy that we've employed for the airport's funds have allowed them to decrease the amount that they charge the airlines for passenger fees. So, while our airport is not the sexiest, it does what it needs to do. It gets people in and out. It gets people on their way to wherever they're flying to. And I think that we have a great leader in Rhonda Hamm, who's doing some fabulous work there. What this really is about is the land around the airport. I mean, let's get this straight. This is about the entire airport. So it's the land around the airport, and they want to capitalize off of that. I would rather see the city come up with a plan to try to capitalize off the land around the airport and see what we can do differently to monetize that for more money and revenue for the city.
Getting to the office you hold now, the treasurer's office, you are in charge of parking. You're also in charge of the city in investments with banks. Now, you've been hesitate to say leaning on, but encouraging the banks with whom the city does business to invest more in city communities. How does that work? I mean, a bank is obviously not a social institution. A bank's there to make money.
Yes, they are.
What do you tell them if you've got, Bank XYZ and say, hey, we invest X million dollars with you, we'd like you to do more in the city? When you say you want them to do more, what are you looking at?
We're looking at their lending patterns north of Del Mar. If you look at our annual report that just came out a couple of weeks ago that we revealed at the Funds Committee meeting with the mayor and the comptroller, it shows a stark pattern that there is zero to almost no lending in North St. Louis. And for all intents and purposes, we all say that St. Louis, that we don't use redlining anymore. Well, that looks like redlining to me. When a house that looks exactly the same on Schweitzer and McLaren as a house that's down in Holly Hills, that the house in North St. Louis appraises for $50,000 or more less than the house in South St. Louis. And you've driven around the city, you see the same housing stock in North St. Louis that it is in South St. Louis. So why are the housing values different? Why are we still redlining North St. Louis? And so the studies show, or everybody knows, that your wealth, most of your wealth comes from your house.
But aren't the banks going to argue that the reason we don't do that is the house may be the same, but if you look at the neighborhood, a lot of these neighborhoods are collapsing. The crime rate is, in some of them, astronomical, and no bank in its right mind is going to invest money and take a chance losing it in a neighborhood like that.
Well, let's bring that back around. That's where the city needs to do more as well. The city needs to be pushing investment north as well. We give away TIFs and tax abatements to businesses in the Central Corridor and downtown, but how many TIFs are in North St. Louis? How many TIFs are north of Del Mar? That whole tax increment financing program was supposed to spur development where development would not go. That's what that but-for statement is for.
You keep anticipating my questions. It's like you peeked at my notes. I mean, the TIFs, the tax increment financing, that was originally set up to help distressed areas. It has been even one of your department's parking garages, the Argyle parking garage, for heaven's sake, had a TIF that I believe was recently retired.
We retired it early.
Right.
Yes.
Are TIFs being misused? And as someone who is neither a city official nor a real estate developer, can you tell me why a TIF is necessary in the first place for a private business to do something? Because that money, when you're taking away taxes, what you're generally doing is taking money away from the schools.
Exactly.
In property taxes. Why have TIFs? And if they're necessary in some cases, have they been abused, and does their use need to be cut way back?
So, yes, they have been abused. I think that we have too many in places where development is going to happen anyway. I think where we should turn the corner is, what are we getting in return? Are we putting community benefit agreements on with the TIFs. So, for example, you can say, well, we're going to give you we're going to set up this TIF for you so you can build these new luxury apartments. But what we want in return is inclusionary zoning for affordable housing for a percentage of the units. What we want in return is to make sure that a certain percentage of the people building this project are city residents, or
and those kind of things are not included in the TIF agreements now.
those kinds of things are not included in TIF agreements now. There is a minority inclusion piece, but that's a city ordinance. We could also say that, hey, we're going to give you this TIF, but we want you to make a payment in lieu of taxes to the school district for the amount that your TIF would have taken away from our schools. And that way, our school district would have wouldn't be losing revenue on each new TIF project that we do in the city, which is, I think there are over 150 of them now.
Speaking of money, your treasurer's office is also in charge of parking revenue. Why does that not go directly into the general revenue fund or budget for the city of St. Louis? Why is parking revenue is sort of segregated into its own pile of cash? Why is that? Why
but
not
we
just
have city employees just like everybody else. So I mean that theory that it doesn't go back into the general revenue fund is false, because we have 150 employees that are city employees. So that goes into that they are considered city employees. We give millions of dollars a year over what the state law says as far as like what we're supposed to. We are supplementing the budget of the Treasury operations, which constantly gets cut by Ways and Means. Plus, we've made over $25 million in investments for the city as a result of changing our investment strategy from a passive investment strategy to an active investment strategy. So, I mean, our employees are city employees just like everybody else, and we pay their salaries, which a bulk of the revenue goes to pay their salaries. Treasurer's parking division employees used to be part of the city, and that revenue came directly from the city, and then they came over to the parking division. So the other part is we have over $65 million in debt for building garages around the city, and our building garages helps development projects not have to get further TIFs or tax abatements, because now there's parking available within or a walking distance of their properties.
Now, one of the programs the Treasurer's Office was working on was this college fund for kids, where every kid who's in kindergarten gets a college fund with $50 in it. And, something being better than nothing, this gives them a head start.
Right.
My question would be, since so many of these kids move around, a lot of them, vanish from the school system, the addresses change all the time. What happens to the money in these accounts if the kids never collect them? Does it go back to the city? Does it go to the banks? Does the money get rolled back into the program for other kids? How does that work for any money that's not claimed for college expenses?
Well, for those who aren't aware of what the College Kids program is, we provide a $50 savings account for every kindergartner in a public school for post-secondary education. And we started this program because research at Washington University shows that children with less than $500 saved are 3 times more likely to go to college and 4 times more likely to complete college than children without saving. And this is the first year that we have had to close accounts because children have been murdered in our program. And that money goes back into the fund for other children to use, unfortunately. And then there was one who had actually started building her account, and so that money will go to her next of kin. But it's a sobering existence, but we press on because we know that somebody has to invest in our children, because if we don't invest in them now, we will pay for them later.
So the money gets rolled back in for other kids.
For other kids, yes.
To use. We are flat out of time. Tishaura Jones, thank you very much for coming in. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
Our thanks to City Treasurer Tishaura Jones, and our thanks to you for being with us. We hope you can join us right back here next week for another edition of the Jaco Report. See you then.